Jason was flying the plane as usual until he started hearing loud banging against the windows. He quickly realized it was a flock of birds, and it seemed like they were attacking the plane. If one of them got sucked into the engines, things could go south very fast. The birds seemed to get more aggressive the more Jason tried to shake them off, and the situation would only get worse. The birds wouldn't leave the plane alone, and from what he heard from the cabin crew, the passengers were starting to freak out. They thought the birds would make the plane crash, so everyone was panicking. Jason assured the passengers that he had everything under control, but he actually didn't, and he was forced to call for help. Jason called flight control to find out what his options were. He had a feeling it was only a matter of time before one of the birds got too close to the engines. The birds kept on growing in numbers and getting more aggressive. At that point, the passengers could barely see anything out the windows because the view was blocked by the birds. That also made the plane dark, which made the atmosphere even scarier. Jason tried as hard as he could to gain altitude in an attempt to shake off the birds. But climbing too high would also be dangerous, so there was only so much he could do. With the birds obstructing the view, he hadn't realized that he was in the city, and the buildings looked dangerously close. He had to return to the airport and land the plane. Finally, Jimmy got a call to immediately turn the plane to the nearest runway. Flight control had told them to head to a smaller airport closer to their current location. Jason wasted no time and turned the plane around. The situation became really dangerous. As the plane turned, they hit a couple of birds, which seemed to set them off even more, and they continued to hit the windows. Some of them even began to crack, so Jason knew he had to hurry and land the plane as soon as possible. Jason was informed that emergency services were already on their way to the runway. Jason just had to make sure they could reach it. Only then would they be able to get some help. He had to do everything he could to avoid crashing. But when he reached the runway, things took a turn for the worse. Other birds had emerged from the nearby forest, and they were immediately attracted to the plane. Jason had a feeling that this could end in disaster. A few moments later, the plane began to shake, and Jason could barely control it. It was also losing altitude, and the passengers noticed, so everyone was screaming and crying. And then, the worst happened. But before we learn what that is, give this video a like to help it reach 10K, and subscribe to the channel for more content. One of the engines finally exploded, and Jason's heart was pounding in his chest. The plane was falling, so Jason only had one choice. He had to make an emergency landing, something he had never done before outside of flight simulations. As he descended, he saw a body of water in the distance and calculated that he could barely make it. Landing in the water would be safer than landing on land, so he had to do everything in his power. It wasn't a soft landing, but Jason made it, and the plane didn't fall apart. Now, his only concern was for the safety of the plane's crew and passengers. Everyone was still terrified and screaming, but the crew managed to help people calm down. Eventually, they went to open the emergency exits, but realized that the birds were still swarming around the plane. What would have happened if they had opened the doors? However, they couldn't stay inside the plane, they had to evacuate. Jason was beyond stressed by this point, and he decided they had to open one of the exits. There was no other option. The plane had already started sinking, so they had to get everyone out safely. The crew tried to get everyone to exit calmly, but some people were desperate, and they wanted to be the first to get out. Something they immediately regretted. The first people to go out were attacked by the birds, so they had to dive into the water. Some birds even flew into the plane. They were so aggressive, and they were particularly interested in the entrance to the baggage hold. Jason was the last to jump in the water, and fortunately, the Coast Guard was already arriving. As the Coast Guard got everyone out of the water safely, the birds began to form circles over the plane. It was as if they wanted something inside the plane, and everyone was very confused by their behavior. Then, the situation got worse when the Coast Guard tried to approach them. The birds became more alert, and it seemed that they had no intention of letting the Coast Guard get close to the plane. but they were determined. However, immediately after arriving at the wreck, they were attacked by birds. Frightened, they all went back to the boats. There had to be a way to scare the birds away. Otherwise, they would never be able to get near the wreckage. They had to come up with a plan because they had to get the plane out of the water to inspect it. There was no time to waste. More people from the Coast Guard arrived, and when they heard what happened with the birds, they knew what to do. They had learned that making sounds could scare the birds away, so everyone started using their loudspeakers. Immediately, the birds fled into the surrounding forest. As some Coast Guards continued making noise, another group of them attached cables to the plane to tow it out of the water. Fortunately, it wasn't so hard, and they managed to get it done pretty quickly. Then, the police arrived. Jason was in charge of the plane, so the police started to ask him questions. Jason had nothing to hide, and he started from the beginning. He explained it was a normal flight until he noticed the flock of birds. He recounted everything else that happened, and also explained that the birds were particularly interested in the luggage. So, the police started asking questions about the baggage to all the passengers. Although they were still in shock by everything that happened, everyone answered all of the police's questions about what they were carrying and what was in their luggage, except for one passenger. He was being very ambiguous with his answers, and he wouldn't say why he was making the trip. He was full of contradictions as well, so the police were very suspicious of him. When the passenger wouldn't say what was in his luggage, the police started to search him. The first thing they noticed was that his passport looked fake, so they had to take his prints. When they entered them into the database, they had an answer. The man had just been released from prison and his files were classified, so the police had no idea who they were dealing with. They still had to find out what he was carrying because that could be the answer to the reaction from the birds. So, they turned to the plane and they started a thorough inspection. However, the birds were back and they were all over the plane. The Coast Guard started making noise again and the police were finally able to approach the plane. It wasn't easy to get to the luggage because the door was stuck and they had to wait for special equipment to get it open. Eventually, they managed to get into the luggage. As soon as they did, they heard some strange sounds. When they approached the suitcases, they were able to locate exactly which suitcase the sound was coming from. When they opened it, everyone was speechless. The suspicious passenger was immediately arrested because the name on that suitcase matched the name on his fake passport. Jason ran to the scene to see what they found, and he turned pale when he realized what was happening. The man was smuggling exotic birds. Eventually, they got information about the man, and it turns out he had been arrested for smuggling exotic animals. When he was released, he went back to his old ways and started doing business again. Of course, the man was charged and, this time, he wouldn't get out of prison because he had endangered the lives of everyone on the plane. In the end, the birds weren't trying to attack the plane. They were simply answering the call of the distressed birds hidden in the luggage. It's amazing how animals can look after each other. Let us know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more. Until next time.